When life deals you the kind of hand Jimmy Butler was dealt, simply having a normal, stable life could be considered a success. NBA superstardom is about as far from reasonable expectations as you can get. Yet, this is exactly what Jimmy Butler has achieved. From being abandoned by his father and kicked out of the house by his mother to NBA stardom over a rocky path, this is his story. Jimmy Butler, or Jimmy Butler III, if you want to use his full name, was born on September 14th, 1989 in Houston, Texas. His father, Jimmy Butler Sr., abandoned the family while little Jimmy was still an infant, so he and his mother had to make it on their own. Growing up without a father is tough, and Jimmy kept getting into trouble. Things boiled over one day when his mom bluntly told him, "I don't like the look of you. You gotta go," and kicked him out of the house. A 13-year-old boy with no home, no parents to turn to, and no money in his pocket. If you know anything about Jimmy, you know he's a tough guy, and this period of his life probably played a huge role in shaping his mental toughness. He bounced around from one friend's place to another, never staying in one location for more than a few weeks. This went on for a few years, and even though his address was changing every so often, his love of basketball was constant. Playing for Tomball High School, Jimmy's junior season numbers were nothing to lose your mind over since he averaged just 10 points per game. His fortune started to change in the summer before his senior year. During one summer league game, he caught the attention of Jordan Leslie, a freshman football and basketball player for Tomball. Jordan challenged Jimmy to a shooting competition after the game, and the two became fast friends. Jordan would often invite Jimmy to his house to play video games and stay the night.
Just one more night. And it kind of developed into a week and then a month.
Jordan had a big family. His mother and stepfather had 6 other children, and Jimmy would slowly become a part of it. Michelle, Jordan's mom, would initially allow Jimmy to stay over for 1 or 2 nights, but a few months later, she and her husband would embrace Jimmy into their family, telling him he could stay over for good.
You know, people say you just take a child you don't even know. He's brought more to us than ever we could bring to him.
Jimmy felt wanted and loved here, something he sorely lacked for many years of his life. In spite of what you might expect, Jimmy has a healthy relationship with his biological parents today. In his own words, "I don't hold grudges. I still talk to my family, my mom, my father when he was alive. We love each other. That's never going to change." His newfound stability with the Leslie family allowed Jimmy to shine on the basketball court. He became team captain for his senior year and led the way with 19.8 points and 8.7 rebounds per game. He was voted the team's MVP for the season, but it was too little too late as far as his college prospects were concerned. With 0 D1 interest, Butler went to Tyler Junior College, where he would immediately impress with 18.1 points, 7.7 rebounds, and 3.1 assists per game. This was by no means a golden ticket to elite D1 programs, since he was considered just a 2-star recruit, but it was enough to put him on the radar of a few D1 schools. He picked Marquette and came off the bench for his first season there. His reduced role compared to junior college torpedoed his numbers, but the comings and goings of players opened a spot for him in the starting lineup his junior year. His 14.7 points and 6.4 rebounds were enough to make him an All-Big East honorable mention. The numbers saw a slight uptick in his senior season with one more All-Big East honorable mention, and his stats were once again good, yet unremarkable. But sometimes the numbers don't tell the whole story, and this was one of those times. NBA scouts saw potential in his raw tenacity, which was a big point in his scouting report. Aggressive when looking for contact, makes a big impact on the offensive glass, keeping possessions alive and getting a lot of tip-ins. Tough defender, and smart kid with a good head on his shoulders and a strong work ethic. But he was also called a jack of all trades, and a master of none, which is a lot more damning than it sounds. Even a one-dimensional shooter is often in higher demand than someone who doesn't have a clear role on the team. The scouting report concluded with mentions of Jimmy maybe being worth attention to early in the second round. Looking at mock drafts back in 2011, you could find Jimmy going all over the place in the second round, from the low 30s to the high 40s. Mock drafts are fun to look at, yet the only draft order that matters is the one the NBA commissioner and his deputy read out on draft night. When the 2011 NBA draft rolled around, the Chicago Bulls threw analyst predictions of the second round to the wind and took Jimmy with the 30th overall pick.
With the 30th pick in the 2011 draft, the Chicago Bulls select Jimmy Butler from Marquette University.
He was going to a team with reigning MVP Derrick Rose, as well as guys like Joakim Noah, Luol Deng, Kyle Korver, Carlos Boozer, and the White Mamba himself, Brian Scalabrine. For a kid whose biggest strength was his toughness, having teammates like Noah was a gift from heaven. And since the Bulls were the #1 seed in the East the year before, there was no pressure for him to immediately contribute. The 2011-2012 NBA season was shortened by a lockout, so Jimmy got fewer reps than rookies usually do, and playing under a coach notorious for over-reliance reliance on veterans didn't help either. Just like before, Jimmy's early NBA tenure was unremarkable. Playing in just 42 and starting 0 games out of 66, Jimmy averaged just 2.6 points in 8 minutes per game on shooting percentages that are better left unmentioned. The Bulls made the playoffs in Jimmy's rookie year, and Tom Thibodeau's inability to rest his starters when they don't have to be playing cost not just the Bulls, but the basketball world as a whole. You probably know what I'm talking about already. Game 1, Bulls against the 76ers. Rose goes down with 1 minute and 20 seconds left in the fourth, and the Bulls up by 12. He tore his ACL, and we never got to see one of the most electrifying players of that era hit his true prime. This injury left the team in turmoil. Thibodeau couldn't play Rose 35 plus minutes per game anymore, so a new rotation was needed. Jimmy managed to earn consistent rotation minutes in his second year, where he played all 82 games and even started in all of the team's 12 playoff games. Slowly but surely, Jimmy was finding his NBA stride. His stats and his minutes were trending upward, and his defensive ability was getting noticed, with some DPOY votes going his way. By year 3, Jimmy became a full-time starter playing Tom Thibodeau minutes, by which I mean leading the entire league in minutes per game with 38.7. But even the number pales in comparison to Jimmy's single-game record. In a triple overtime game against the Magic on January 15th, 2014, Jimmy played for a whopping 60 minutes and 20 seconds. For comparison, many top stars in the league barely clear that many minutes over 2 games. By this point in time, Jimmy had carved out a clear role on an NBA team, and he had a bright future in the league. Not many 30th overall picks can say that, but someone with Jimmy's attitude doesn't settle for average. His true breakout came in the 2014-15 season, where he averaged 20 points for the first time in his career and got not only the Most Improved Player award, but also his first All-Star selection. He picked a great time to start balling out. This was his 4th season, so he's up for a new contract, and a new contract he got. $95 million over 5 years with a player option. By now, Jimmy was the leader of the team, and that didn't sit well with everyone. Jimmy was vocal, demanding, and some of the older guys on the team had a hard time respecting a player they remember averaging 2 points a game just a few short years ago. Despite Jimmy's rise to stardom, the Bulls were on the decline. The team fired Tom Thibodeau in 2015 because of poor playoff performances. Despite Jimmy's all-star level of play, the team didn't improve with Fred Hoiberg at the helm. It was clear that as good as Jimmy was getting, he wasn't someone who could lead you to a championship, especially with the rest of the roster looking the way it did. But Jimmy was by far their most valuable trade asset, so when they decided to tear the team down and start rebuilding in 2017, they dealt Jimmy to Minnesota for several young players who might one day develop into stars. Butler was exactly the kind of player Minnesota needed, a tough and vocal leader who can mold their young core and team culture. Not only that, but the trade reunited Jimmy with Tom Thibodeau. Despite the fit on paper, Minnesota's young core of Cat and Andrew Wiggins did not respond well to Butler. He saw them as lazy, uninterested in improving, and timid. Never being the one to stay silent, Jimmy called them out often, and when he saw no change, it was clear that Minnesota was not the right place for him. It certainly didn't help that he also reunited with some of his older former Bulls teammates, who still couldn't find as much respect for him as they would for some other leader. He requested a trade before the start of training camp in 2018, giving Minnesota an ultimatum: trade me or I will walk away in free agency at the end of the season. Jimmy was disgusted with the team culture in Minnesota, so in one October practice, he decided to make a statement. As the legendary story goes, he took on the starters with a team of third-string bench warmers and proceeded to absolutely tear the starters apart. He was furious, and he was shouting at the coach and team owner after every made basket or defensive play. "You need me. You can't win without me. Trade me." The stories of what exactly he was shouting vary, but the outcome and the point Jimmy was trying to make was clear. The team is not capable of following him. The Timberwolves got the message and traded Jimmy to the 76ers shortly into the 2018-19 season. With Joel Embiid, Ben Simmons, and a quality supporting cast, Jimmy was on a legitimate title contender for the first time since his rookie season. The 76ers were a force to be reckoned with that season, and anything less than the finals would be a disappointment. Jimmy had some disagreements with coach Brett Brown, but he was getting along with Simmons and Embiid just fine, and the team was winning plenty of games, so the issues between Brown and Butler were swept aside. But keep them in mind, they'll be relevant in a minute. Entering the playoffs as the 3rd seed, Philly made short work of Brooklyn and were on a collision course with Toronto in the Eastern Conference semifinals. Jimmy was a consistent producer during the series, but Embiid and the rest of the team were anything but consistent. The series went to 7 games, and Game 7 went down to the wire. Jimmy tied the game at 90 with just 4 seconds left on the clock. Just when it seemed that we'd get overtime in Game 7, Kawhi Leonard crushed Philly's hopes with an iconic buzzer beater that seems to have bounced around forever before finally going in.
It's off to Leonard, defended by Simmons. Is this the dagger?
Remember those issues I mentioned between Butler and Brett Brown? Without winning to keep things in check, tensions boiled over. Jimmy was up for a new contract, and if Philadelphia wanted to retain him, there would be some terms. Jimmy didn't trust Brown's ability to shape the team culture and hated his avoidance of holding players accountable. Once again, he gave his team an ultimatum, only this time it was because he genuinely liked the team and wanted to be better. He wanted Brett Brown gone, and it was Brown or Butler. But he was far from the Sixers' only worry. Tobias Harris was also up for a new contract, and there was also the question of what to do with Ben Simmons. At this point, Ben was still considered a future superstar, and the Sixers wanted him to act as the primary ball handler on offense, something that was difficult to do with Butler playing the point guard position that season. Jimmy was close with Joel Embiid, but the Sixers organization and many around the league still saw Simmons as the better building block. Knowing what we know today, you gotta ask what the hell was everyone thinking? But I'm serious, this was the prevailing opinion at the time. Anyway, the Sixers made not one, not two, but 4 awful decisions. 1. Brett Brown stayed as the coach but got fired after the next season, partly for letting bad habits develop and failing to keep the roster accountable, almost as if someone was complaining about those exact same things not too long ago. Keeping Brown combined with choosing Ben as their primary playmaker meant that Jimmy was basically told to go look for some other team. That's a 2-for-1 bad decision special. 4. They decided to give Tobias Harris the max. Don't get me wrong, Tobias is a fine player, but giving him the max is the kind of financial move that haunts your team for years to come and makes your accountant start drinking heavily. What did the Sixers win for making 4 terrible decisions in a row? Nothing. They won nothing, as you'd probably expect, especially with Doc Rivers being named as their new head coach. And guess what? That makes 5 terrible decisions in a row. With Philly digging their own grave and choosing to get rid of him, Jimmy needed a new team. There was only one organization in the league that had a culture matching Jimmy's intensity, accountability, and work ethic, and that organization wanted him to become their new leader. One sign and trade later, Jimmy was on the Miami Heat. The Heat under Spoelstra and Pat Riley were always a team where individuals were held accountable regardless of their rank and where hard work was put on a pedestal. But this particular Heat roster was made up almost exclusively of players who had to carve their own NBA path from unremarkable backgrounds. Plenty of late first-round picks, second-round picks, and even undrafted players, all of which went through similar situations as Jimmy, all of which could relate to him and look up to him as an example of what was possible if you want it bad enough and you are willing to put in the effort. And Jimmy was the perfect guy to lead them. Whereas on other teams, Jimmy would often be alone in the gym at crazy hours of the night. Here, he was always joined by at least a few of his teammates. This Heat team found instant chemistry, and Jimmy was playing at an all-NBA level. In his first season there, the Heat finished 5th in the East, but they bulldozed through the playoffs and made a surprise finals appearance. There was no fairy tale ending though, since this was clearly the Lakers' year and the Heat went down 4-2 in the finals. But the 2 games they took off the Lakers were more than anyone was expecting. Jimmy was the embodiment of willpower in that series, playing his heart out and willing his team forward despite barely being able to stand from exhaustion at certain points. Despite the loss, Jimmy and the Heat earned the respect of the NBA world for the fight they put up. The team had tasted success, and it felt like they were just getting started. Under Jimmy's leadership, players like Bam Adebayo and Tyler Hero blossomed into legitimate stars in the league, and Miami was a threat to any opponent they faced. Miami was scorching in the 2021-22 season, finishing as the #1 seed in the East, and Jimmy once again getting named to the All-Star squad after being left out the year prior. They were once again looking to go all the way, but the Celtics stopped them in the Eastern Conference Finals that went to 7 games. The 2022-23 season didn't go nearly as well, with the Heat barely making the playoffs as the 8th seed. But if there's one thing you should never underestimate, it's a team of underdogs coached by Spo and led by Jimmy. The #1 seed Bucks made that mistake and lost 4-1 in the first round, just the 6th time in history that a #8 seed beat a #1 seed. New York put up a slightly better fight in round 2, but it was far from enough. The #2 seed Celtics were once again waiting in the conference finals. Miami quickly went up 3-0 and the series was looking like a sweep, but the Celtics roared back to tie the series 3-3 and force a Game 7 in TD Garden. It was the greatest comeback in NBA playoff history. At least that's what we would be saying had the Celtics managed to complete it. Jimmy scored a team-high 28 points in Game 7 in Boston to punch Miami's second ticket to the finals in 4 years, and he was the Heat's leading scorer in 5 of the 7 games. The Heat became the first ever 8th seed to make the finals in a full NBA season. It looked like the stars had finally aligned, and they did, but for a different team. Jokic and the Nuggets were simply invincible, and the Heat once again fell just short of the ultimate prize. It's unclear what the future holds for Jimmy and the Heat. At the time of writing, trade rumors are swirling around Jimmy, but regardless of whether or not he retires with the Heat, and even if he never wins a championship, he'll always be a person who blew way past any expectations that anyone ever had for him. For that fact alone, he's worthy of respect and a great example for overlooked players everywhere.